So firstly, I want to thank all of you for coming to today's Introduction to HydroShare webinar. Before we get started, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Quasi YouTube channel. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit questions. I will do my best to get to as many as possible, but also know that I've budgeted time at the end of this workshop intentionally so that we have time for questions and answers and discussion if needed. Finally, we expect that all involved in Quasi Cyber Seminar Series uphold the Quasi Code of Conduct and promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. Just to reiterate, this webinar will consist of an overview of Quasi's open source water data repository HydroShare and will cover new and upcoming features to the system. If you have any questions afterward, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I will provide you with my contact information before we close our session, as well as a general help line for Quasi and HydroShare. My name is Clara Cogswell. I have a background in geology and hydrogeology, and I am the community support hydrologist at Quasi. So many of you may already be familiar with Quasi, but just in case you don't know what the acronym stands for, it stands for the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences, Inc. So that's the I on the end. We are a nonprofit funded in part by the National Science Foundation, and we offer both education and outreach services and data services. And we maintain and administer HydroShare. So, on our education and outreach side, we offer workshops, grants, fellowships. We convene cyber seminars for the water community, and we host Quasi Virtual University. On our data services side, we offer compute services like Quasi Jupyter Hub and MATLAB Online, which I will talk about both briefly today in conjunction with HydroShare, and the topic of today's webinar, HydroShare, an open source file agnostic water data repository for the water community. And all of these services are provided, data services are provided free of charge to the water community. So we developed HydroShare with FAIR data in mind, and many of you are probably already familiar with the acronym FAIR, um, but it stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. Many people think the R stands for reproducible, it stands for reusable. And there are some key tenets of FAIR data that we've strived to make achievable through HydroShare. So, findable data are accessible by a globally unique and persistent identifier. All resources in HydroShare have that, whether they're published or public. Accessible metadata are retrievable by that identifier using a standardized communication protocol. In this case, in HydroShare, is HTTP. Um, Interoperable metadata use a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. Our metadata template is robust, and we're going to go through it in detail today, so you won't have any lingering questions about it. Reusable metadata are richly described with a plurality of accurate and relevant attributes. And below that, specifically relevant are metadata are released with a clear and accessible data usage license, which you can select in HydroShare from least to most restrictive. Metadata are associated with detailed provenance, so you have the ability to describe where the data was collected, why it was collected, who collected it, and how you expect end users to interact with that data. And metadata meet domain relevant community standards. As a domain specific repository, HydroShare serves this purpose of allowing the water community to gather around a central place for water data with a common set of metadata standards for published data. So, what can you do in HydroShare? Before we move directly into the platform, we're going to go over some of its capabilities. You can share data, upload any file through a simple interface with 20 gigabytes of free storage, and you can keep data private or share it with collaborators or make it public depending on where your data is in the data lifecycle. You can publish data and receive a digital object identifier. You can link publications like journal articles to published data, and you can make data accessible to the reviewers on your papers anonymously and the water data community. You can collaborate by creating groups to share with other specific users. And you can create a community, which is a group of groups, and share group data up to the community level. I'll go over both of those features later. And you can join the Quasi Cloud Computing group, which allows you access to all of our cloud computing services. You can launch and run code as well. So code stored in HydroShare can be launched directly into our pre-configured computing environments and executed. So HydroShare is file agnostic, meaning it will accept any file type. This fulfills the need of the water community for a general purpose water data repository with publication and discovery capabilities. Not listed here, but also a strong feature in HydroShare is the Discover page. HydroShare has an internal discovery page, which I will cover and show you how to utilize. We are excited to cover some new features and recently added features today. We have a relatively new upload system that allows you to upload directly from Google Drive and increases the size of the files that can be uploaded through the interface to 25 gigabytes per file. New CSV content type that allows users to preview the top 10 rows of a CSV. So you can preview other users' CSVs or other users can preview yours, and I'll show you how to do that as well. And we'll cover how to request more quota in your profile if you've run through your 20 gigabytes of storage. We also have an update on a minor change to publishing and quota for published resources, which is a positive update, um, but requires a little bit of coverage in this webinar. So first, we're going to go over how to create an account in HydroShare. And if you're following along and creating an account for the first time, feel free to begin that process now. There are three ways to create an account in HydroShare using what's called quasi-single sign-on. Um, you can either link your Orc ID to your HydroShare account, in which case you would be able to use your Orc ID credentials to log into HydroShare. And then you'll just be able to begin using HydroShare. There's no additional steps. And the benefit of this is not only that you have one set of credentials across OrcID and HydroShare, but also it links your publications in HydroShare to your OrcID profile. You can also use a pre-approved email domain, so you can create an account using an email ending in .edu, .gov, or .org, and your account will be automatically approved, and you can log in and begin using the system. You can also create an account with, for example, a Gmail, but there is an extra step in which you write a short sentence about the use case, about your use case for HydroShare, and then it is reviewed by a member of Quasi staff. Someone just asked, sorry, I joined a little late. Will this be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded. And if you have any additional questions, we can have more time at the end in case you missed anything. So if you create an account with a Gmail, for example, you have to write a short sentence about your use case, and then it will be reviewed and approved. One-word responses to this prompt will be automatically rejected. This is essentially because we are trying to detect and eliminate bots. An activity that bots do en masse is create accounts on websites, and we want to make sure that HydroShare stays a safe, user-friendly community for the water community specifically. So these requests are reviewed very quickly, and there's a lot of reasons you might not want to use an institutional email to create your HydroShare account. For example, mobility between institutions, and we recognize that. So if you're currently doing the account creation process, just know that if you type like hello into the account justification, it will be rejected. And if you're submitting one of those now, I'll be able to approve it after the end of the webinar. Okay, so now we're going to move directly into how and where data is stored in HydroShare. If you have just logged into HydroShare or you've just created an account and you've entered the system, you'll see a Create button in the top right corner. And in that dropdown, you'll see Resource Collection and App Connector. I'm going to go over Resource first, but I will not leave you in suspense about the other two. We will cover them. But in HydroShare, data is stored within resources, and that is the primary unit of digital content and discovery in HydroShare. So when someone clicks a link to access your data, they're taken to the resource landing page. And that what lives at that URL is your resource, which contains your data and your metadata. It's a landing page for your data that walks users through your metadata in a really understandable manner and has a robust array of metadata elements for you to utilize. And it has a copyable citation and allows you to select the license that governs the reuse of your data. At this juncture, when people are creating resources, I often get questions about what are the rules for how I put my data in HydroShare? How should I chunk it? How should I divvy up my data? Users have a lot of discretion on how data is chunked in HydroShare. You might decide to put all of the data from one field site within one resource, or all the temperature data from a sampling campaign in one resource, nutrient data in another. Some people share their raw data with a detailed README file alongside quality controlled data. The rationale for how you chunk your data in HydroShare should be informed, though, by how you expect end users to interact with and use that data. And the metadata of the resource should put your data into context. There are a bunch of built-in features, though, to assist you with this chunking, and we will go over them. So first, we're going to go over the resource, and later, how collections can allow you to increase the granularity and make decisions about your chunking of your data. So if you're following along, feel free to create a resource right now. It will be set to private when you create it, so no one's going to find your empty resource. But so you just click create and you would enter a title, and this is what a resource looks like for a user. So this one is called Analyzing Air Temperature in Jupyter Notebooks. And as you can see, there is a Jupyter Notebook and a CSV in the content section. Here is the citation, and you can see it's governed by the Creative Commons license. And we're going to go over this in detail, but just so you don't have to kind of imagine what a resource looks like, you can see that it has a title. It's owned by Anthony Castronova, the head of Quasi Compute Services. It's public. It's been viewed 756 times and downloaded 102 times at the time of this recording. And it consumes 2.4 megabytes of storage, and it has some subject keywords. So this is just what a resource landing page looks like. And this is one that has already been publicly shared. And you can see that it's www.hydroshare.org. And then at the end of the URL, you have an alphanumeric code that is this resource's identifier, globally unique and persistent identifier. So once you've created a resource, the default status is private. And if you've just created a resource, you'll be able to see that in the sharing status section of your resource. But resources can occupy many different sharing statuses within HydroShare. So I'm going to go over a few of those and also the statuses at which you can add other HydroShare users, for example, your collaborators or your students, to your resources and manage the degree to which they can make changes to your resource. So users can be added as viewers who can view the resource even if it's private but not make any changes. Editors who can change the resource but not add other users or delete it. I'll tell you why this is important in a moment. And owners who can take any action on a resource, including delete it and changing the quota holder. And I'll go over what the quota holder is in a minute. So why would you want to add someone, for example, as an editor rather than an owner? An owner can delete your resource. No one does this maliciously, but we've had instances where like a student accidentally deletes their advisor's resource. And because the student had the access to delete it rather than just make changes to it. So you can kind of decide what level you want to add people at. Do they just need to be able to view it? Do they need to be able to make changes to it? Or do they need to be able to hold the quota for the resource, for example, and be an owner? You can add groups, which are groups of users, as viewers and editors. So they can view it but not make changes to it. Or you can add an entire group of people as editors. Private resources are available to groups, but groups cannot be owners of resources because ownership stays at the depositor level. So a whole group of people can't be an owner of a resource. It has to be an individual user. There are several statuses that a resource can occupy. You saw that the one I showed you was public, which means that all of the metadata and all of the files are available to anyone who finds the resource, and they can download the files and view the metadata. But the default status once you create a resource is private, meaning no one can discover it and no one can find it unless you add them at one of these three statuses. Discoverable means the metadata is available, but the files are hidden. So someone would have to contact you at the email you have listed in HydroShare in order to gain access to the files. Public, as I said, means all of the metadata are discoverable and the files are as well, and it can be discovered on Google Dataset Search and the Discover page. And published means that it's discoverable everywhere. It has a digital object identifier and an immutable set of content files. So the difference between public and published is important because a published resource, while it has a digital object identifier, which your manuscript publisher might require, you can no longer change the files because something at the other end of a DOI needs to be immutable and always point to the same thing. And the citation cannot be subject to change. And I will go over when you might want to use these different statuses as we move directly into the demo on HydroShare. So this is what the access control panel looks like. If you are following along in HydroShare right now, you might already see this little icon. Um, but now we're going to go directly into HydroShare, and I'm going to show you how to navigate this access control panel in a resource. And we're going to go over what it means to be an author on a resource versus what it means to be an owner on a resource. So here we go. This is my example resource in HydroShare. It does not contain anything. You can see it says example resource. And you can see that HydroShare is trying to tell me, hey, this resource is currently not sufficient for, public consumption. It could use a detailed abstract, some detailed keywords. You should really add a funding agency if this data collection is being funded. And you should add a README file containing variables, abbreviations, acronyms, and non-standard file formats. And if you have geographic information related to this data set, it would be good to add geographic coverage. So it's letting me know I'm not going to be able to change the status of this resource until I have a file in the content section. But what I just pointed out in the slides here, hopefully you can see it, is the access management panel. So manage who has access. And this is what I just showed you in the slides. But you can see that I am the owner and the quota holder of this resource, which is private. So I cannot be removed because I hold the quota, which means that this resource, when it has data in it, will consume part of my 20 gigabytes of storage. But I'm going to add someone else to the resource, Emily Clark, our Quasi's project manager. And I'm going to make her an owner on the resource, meaning she can take any action on this resource. All right, I'll click add. And as you can see, now Emily is an owner. So Emily will get a notification that she's been made an owner on this resource and she can take any action on it she wants. I assume that Emily is my collaborator. You'll see that Emily can be removed, but I cannot. That's because this resource always has to consume someone's quota until it's published. And published resources, the quota is adopted by Quasi and the quota amount is reverted to you so you get some storage back. And I'll go over what that looks like when we get to publishing. But you can see that Emily can be removed and I cannot. Say there's a reason that I want to free up this storage and Emily is going to take over ownership of the quota of this resource. I can scroll down. You can see the quota holder of this resource is Claire Cogswell. I can click change and select Emily. Save changes. You can see the size of the resource is 0 bytes, so this won't change anything for Emily. But now I can be removed and Emily cannot. Because Emily holds the quota. Someone once asked me, like, oh, what if someone does this to me maliciously? That's never happened. If it did, we'd kick them off the platform. But that's never occurred. Um, so Emily will get a notice that she is now the quota holder. Say I wanted to add a group. Try adding Quasi. You can see I only have the option to add them as a viewer, to add the group Quasi as a viewer or an editor. The group cannot be an owner. So I'm just going to not add them. And as you can see, this is currently set to private. If I want to make it public, I'm going to have to add a few things like an abstract, a subject keyword, and also a file in the content section because we don't want people just discovering empty resources, right? But say this is something that I need to share with reviewers anonymously on a paper. This is the data supporting a publication, and my reviewers need to be able to access my data. I can keep it private and enable private link sharing. And now I can put this link in my references section of my paper or provide it to my reviewers and they can anonymously review my data. So this is the access management panel. Once there is data in this resource and it fulfills metadata requirements, I'd be able to move it up to discoverable or public. And once it is public, if it meets metadata requirements, it's also eligible for publication. So now we're going to go into how to upload data. Oh, wait, let's go over authorship and ownership really quickly first. So you can see that I have a note here to go over authorship and ownership because people get confused about it. You can see that I'm the author, and in the citation at the bottom of the resource, my name is reflected in the citation. Um, but if I want to add another author, I want Emily to also be reflected in the citation. I can add Emily. And you can see Emily is now the second author in the citation. I have to reload so that it refreshes the citation. But you can see now Emily is also reflected in the citation. Emily being an author, though, like being an author does not give you power over the resource in the same way being an owner does. Authorship is truly just reflected in the citation. So, for example, if you have a student who is on one of your projects and is putting data on HydroShare, and they've made you an author but not an owner on the resource, they may leave your lab and in a few years, you're like, oh, I need to make changes to this resource. I need access to these data files. Before your student leaves, make sure they also add you in as an owner because authorship is truly only reflected in the citation. Owners and editors have control over the data and the resource and can make changes to it. Um, and if, for example, you don't have this done and your student leaves and it's been 5 years and you can't contact them, what you would end up needing to do is make a copy of the resource rather than being added to the original resource. So this is what the resource looks like, not in edit mode, but I'm going to go back into, but this is the copy this resource button, or you could version the resource. But copying the resource and making yourself an owner would be the way to rectify that. But what we recommend is at the outset, your student, for example, or your researcher, making you an owner as well as an author so that when they leave your lab, you don't lose access to the resource. And that's kind of a recurring thing that we come up against because people don't understand the difference between authorship and ownership. And if I want Emily to be the first author on this resource, I actually just drag and drop her name into the first spot. So now Emily is going to be the first author on this resource. So I just moved myself back. And anywhere you see a little YouTube button, there's a short video on how to do that action. But you will have to listen to my voice some more if you click into that because it's me who narrates them. Um, so that is authorship and ownership, and I'm happy to answer any more questions at the end, but that's an important distinction on who controls a resource. So now we're going to go into how to actually upload files to HydroShare. So as we move down the resource, you can see there's a spot for an abstract, and a published resource needs 150 characters in the abstract or 300 characters. And then subject keywords. And it says deleting all of the keywords will set the resource sharing status to private because keywords are essential in how resources are discovered by the discovery page and Google Dataset search. So you need to have at least one subject keyword to make your resource public. So we'll just say water. And now we have one subject keyword, and you can see that they can be added and removed. So now we get down to coverage. You saw at the top there was a note that said if there's geographic coverage associated with this resource, make sure you add it. So now I'm going to show you how to add that geographic coverage. Say that this is a sampling campaign that occurred in near Boston, because that's where I am. So you can either put down a point, in which case HydroShare will say, okay, here's the lat long of that point that you just put down. Or you can put down a box and HydroShare will say, okay, here's the lat long of the corner points of that box. And I'll save my changes. And if you want, you can free text entry the place name. If there's a temporal range associated with this data, you can also set a start and an end date, but you have to have both. And finally, you get to the content section. So you can see I have a CSV in the content section right now. HydroShare has recognized that this is a CSV and is offering me, and will offer any user who comes upon it, the option to preview the top 10 rows of data. And this is just a random integers CSV. But you can see that I also have the option to create folders and to put links in my content section. An important note with links, this is an important distinction. If you put a link in your content section, it precludes the resource from being able to be published and get a DOI because Quasi is very serious about the maintenance of the data in HydroShare. And we can't necessarily be assured that anything at the other end of a different link will always be maintained in the way that we're committed to maintaining data in HydroShare. So there are other ways to add links into your resource, but if it's in the content section, you can't publish it. You can make folder structures, but know it's best to not have spaces between the titles of your folders. And this is very important. If you are not paying attention or you're doing something else, this is the moment I would ask that you pay attention again because this is the button to delete a file from the content section of your resource. It's a trash can icon. And it's going to say, are you sure you want to delete this file? This is the button to delete your entire resource. It's going to ask you to type delete in all caps into this box, and then it will delete your entire resource. I know that they're both trash can icons, but pressing the delete button at the top of the resource will delete the whole resource. If you want to just delete one file from your content section, this is the button you should use. Okay, so for uploading data, you can either, as I mentioned, upload from your local machine, or you can upload from Google Drive, in which case it will ask you to authenticate with Google Drive, of course, and then you'll be able to upload things from Google Drive directly into your HydroShare resource. You can also drag and drop. Upload files up to 25 gigabytes in size by dragging and dropping, and it will also let you know what your remaining quota is. So I actually have 30 gigabytes of quota because I'm an administrator on HydroShare, but it's letting me know you can upload up to 25 gigabytes by dragging and dropping technically, but your remaining quota is 20 gigabytes. Once you have hit the top of your quota, you will not be able to upload additional files until you request more quota. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So you can also just drag and drop files. So if I want to upload, for example, a README file, it'll think for a minute and it'll upload. That was a very small file, but you'll notice that it gave me the option to pause the upload. If you're uploading a 25 gigabyte file, it may be that you expect to experience an interruption in connection during that upload. You might be moving buildings. You might pass through an area where you have an interrupted internet connection. You can pause your upload and then resume it when you get to your next location where you know you have stable internet if you're doing a really large upload. But it's letting me know we finished uploading your README, and a readme.md file or a readme.txt file that is formatted like this, readme.md or readme.txt, will be automatically rendered below the content section of a resource. HydroShare recognizes the README and it wants users to be able to read the README file without having to download the data. So they know how to interact with the data before they download it, or they try to download all of it when they only need part of it, for example. So this is what that looks like. Once I exit edit mode on the resource, which is this blue button that says view resource, and I scroll down, you can see this is I've really just done this so that you can see that it renders Markdown, but you can see that it is displaying the README file for me so that I don't have to download it. We're going to go back into edit mode. So that is uploading files to HydroShare. I think most people drag and drop, but if you have data stored in Google Drive, the Google Drive option is really strong, especially if you are working on shared data. Additional metadata is key value pairs. And then we have a really cool feature called Related Geospatial Features, which is through the GeoConnects project and the Internet of Water, which allows us to add machine-readable linkages between geographic data and other known hydrologic features. So say I want to know all of the HUC2s that intersect my geographic coverage, or I want to know all of the native lands that intersect my geographic coverage. I can select either of those and it will populate I've done Huck 4s that intersects my geographic coverage. And from this list, I can select the ones that I think are relevant. And then that is cataloged in the GeoConnects library. So that has been a really cool collaboration that we've really enjoyed being able to have on the resource landing page. Related resources is important because you might end up in the situation, as I mentioned earlier, where you are in the review process for a paper and the data in this resource supports a publication. So the way this supports that process is say you have a paper that has your citation for your HydroShare resource in the references section. You can say this resource is referenced by, and then you can put the citation for your paper. And then you can copy the citation for your resource and put it in the references of your paper. And in that way, you create a closed loop between your publication and your data. And both can be published. So you can have a published data set and a published paper that link back and forth to each other. Credits include things like funding agencies. So if you start typing national science, it will pre-populate a list of funders that are in our database. Contributors, you can kind of say who did what in regards to this data. And then is your citation. So your citation is copyable, and you can see, as I mentioned before, I'm the first author, Emily is the second author, and it is listing my resource URL. So you can see that this matches this. And you can see that this alphanumeric code is what's at the end of my URL. And below you can see I can select a license. So we are going to go back to the slides briefly to touch on licenses. Never mind, we're going to stay here because we have to keep moving. But so you can select a license, and the de facto license is Creative Commons attribution, which means you can use my data, but you have to cite me. And they get progressively more restrictive as you move down the list. For example, Creative Commons share alike means you can use my data and you have to cite me, but you cannot distribute your product in any more a restrictive manner than you received this data, right? So you can't, for example, put your data behind a paywall if you got my data for free. No commercial use is another option. So Creative Commons attribution, cite me, and you can't use this to make money, um, is another common one. And then you can require that people agree to the rights statement before downloading your data. This is not clicked de facto, this is opt-in, but if you want to make sure people have to click, yes, I agree to the rights before they download your data, you would select this button. And then anyone who discovered my data would have to agree to the license before downloading it and using it. So this is a popular option. So now that is an overview of the resource landing page. So if we view the resource, you can see that it still doesn't have an abstract. HydroShare is not happy about that, but it has geographic coverage, two files, and a README file, and linked data, as well as a copyable citation. It is currently private, but if I enter an abstract, and then I scroll down to my citation, make it public quickly. So if I scroll down to my citation, you can see that now there's a notice underneath the citation. This is important because it's telling me this resource is not published, but once it is published and has a digital object identifier, it will be accessible at the following URL. And then it tells you what your DOI will be once you've published the resource. So this is our DOI prefix, Quasi's DOI prefix, and the alphanumeric code at the end of your URL. So it's saying you don't currently have a DOI, but once you publish, if you decide to, this will be your DOI, 100%. This is our DOI prefix and the ID on your resource. So you can be confident that if your reviewers say, well, this is gonna need a DOI, but you're not ready to publish the resource, you can tell them this will be the DOI for the resource once it's published with confidence. And that way you can continue to make changes to your resource during the review process while also providing what the DOI will be once it is published. Okay. So now we are going to go into what I mentioned previously, which is collections. So a collection is a resource full of resources. And so I mentioned earlier chunking tools within HydroShare. You may want to have many distinct resources filled with certain instances of data that you want people to interact with individually, or you want to be distinct in some way, but you want all the data sets to be linked together and represented as belonging to one project or effort or larger group of data sets. And you want to be able to cite them as one product, right? You don't want 56 citations for all of these different resources in HydroShare. You want to be able to cite them all with one citation. This is where collections come in really handy. A collection is a resource full of resources with its own citation, and also if all of the resources in the collection are published, you can publish the collection and get a DOI for the collection. Um, so cases in which people have found this to be very useful, you have many data contributors from many different places, and you are having trouble getting them to all upload data in the same format or in the same way. Um, you can have them upload data to distinct resources and then add to this collection, and then you have access to the entire collection, and you can export all of it via the API or the Python client using one identifier. So, as an example, I've pulled up a collection. So, this is a collection and it is published, and this is its DOI. It was published in October of 2024. And you can see it has a detailed abstract. And the geographic coverage on a collection is the amalgamation of all of the geographic coverage and all of the included resources. So, you can see that it's linking out to all of these resources. And you can download the collection list, but it's saying that all of these resources are published, and this collection is also published. And if you go down, you can see they've added funding agency, and also here is the collective citation for this collection, which encompasses all of the resources within it. So this is a powerful tool for chunking, and allows you to make decisions about how you want the data to be represented on smaller and larger scales within HydroShare. So next, we're going to go to the Discover page, which I mentioned previously. The Discover page in HydroShare is where you can find data that is discoverable, public, and published within HydroShare. This data also shows up on Google Dataset Search, but this is the internal page on which you can discover data sets. So you can filter by author, owner, subject, contributor, temporal coverage, and content type. So, for example, if you only wanted to see Jupyter notebooks, all of these resources contain Jupyter notebooks that can be launched into our corresponding compute environments. Um, so, for example, if you wanted to see only discoverable data, this is what discoverable data looks like. You can see that it's discoverable. I can see the metadata, but it says you do not have permission to see these content files. Please contact the owner if you wish to obtain access. So this is the Discover page. You can also open and close a map, which shows you all of the data sets on this page of results. If I switch to the next page, it's going to show me a different set of results. But you can drill down into these points and it will open the corresponding data set. So this is the Discover page. Next is the My Resources page, which is where you can view all of the resources that you own, are shared with you, that you have saved, or that you have copied or made versions of. And as you can see, I do a lot of instruction on HydroShare. So I have many that say test for versioning, how to upload files to HydroShare. But if you are uploading data, you'll be able to see all your contributions on this page. So next we're going to go to the profile, and this is going to cover how to access your quota and make changes to it in HydroShare. So when you create your HydroShare account, you are automatically allocated 20 gigabytes of storage. You can request more by going to your profile. And up to around 250 gigabytes, we are not going to ask too many questions, and we'll just kind of give you the data, the storage that you need. Um, Most people really requested moderation, but you'll just enter a brief explanation of why you need the storage and submit it, and then it will be reviewed by a member of Quasi staff. Once you get above 250 to 300 gigabytes, we start to kind of ask questions about whether you can compress the data further, and what you're using the storage for. So I'm going to go to my profile, and you can see that here it's telling me I have used 25 gigabytes of my 30 gigabytes of storage. Say that was full and I needed to request more, or I anticipated that I was about to have to upload a large amount of data, and I already knew the size of that data before I went in and that it was going to consume the rest of my quota. I would hit request additional storage. I would say what the project was, why I need the storage, and I would say how many more gigabytes of storage I think I need above my existing quota. And then I would submit it and it would go to help@quasi.org and it would be reviewed. So that's how you request more quota in HydroShare. Next, we're going to go to groups and communities. So groups are groups of users. Say you have a lab group that consists of many students or many collaborators, or you're on projects that have several collaborators, and everyone is kind of uploading their own data and working on their own stuff, but you want it to be shared with the group without having to add, say, for example, 13 individuals to your resource as a viewer. You can create a group in HydroShare and have everyone join that group. And then when you share to that group, it'll appear on a shared landing page. So this is what that looks like. So you go to the Collaborate tab on HydroShare and you go to Groups. And here you can create a new group and you can say, this is the name of my research group or my working group or whatever other subset of collaborators you need to share with. And you create an email. You can set it to public, discoverable, or you add your email. And then you can set it to private, discoverable, or public. And you can either auto approve membership or require an explanation when requesting membership. This is going to come into play in a minute when I ask you guys to join the Quasi Cloud Computing group if you want to utilize our compute services. So most people auto approve membership because people who are looking for your group are known entities who you're collaborating with, but you can require an explanation. Here you can search for groups by free text entry. Here's the one that I'm going to ask you guys to look up in a minute, Quasi Cloud Computing. And in it, you can see it's discoverable. I'm already a member of this group. It's going to take a long time because this is a group with a lot of members. But you will request to join this group if you want to use our cloud computing services. All right, I'm not going to wait for that to load. But you can either create a group or you can join an existing group. You can also create a community. So if you have a bunch of different groups that are working together under an umbrella organization, you can add those groups to a community and it will filter up to another shared landing page. So for example, the Cairo community is composed of many subgroups within Cairo that are doing independent work, but they want a shared landing page where that data can be viewed. So this is the resources that have been shared with any of these groups. And I can say, I only want to see Cairo community water modeling resources, or I want to see everything. But anything that has been shared to these groups is showing up on this community landing page. And this can be created for you by the HydroShare team. If you want a new community, you go to communities and you request a new community. And then you submit the community request and we make it on the back end for you and you'll be notified once it's complete. So before we move on to cloud computing, we're going to go over how to formally publish something in HydroShare. Data in HydroShare can be permanently published and receive a DOI if it is complete, well described with relevant metadata, and some is required, and adheres to community guidelines, meaning it must be appropriate and it must be water data. We've definitely had people who just really like HydroShare as a platform attempt to put non-water data in HydroShare and publish it. And while we're flattered that they really like the platform, it does have to be water related. It can be snow data. It can be model input and output files for a water study. It can be isotope data, but it just has to be related to water work. So we're not that restrictive about what constitutes water data, but if it's quite obviously outside the realm of water research, then we have to ask you to publish it elsewhere in a different domain-specific repository. So once it has these things, and it has a title that is at least 30 characters and human readable. Do not put a bunch of underscores in your title. That is not how your resource is retrieved programmatically. It's retrieved by the ID. So the title should be human readable. The abstract should it be at least 300 characters, and it should have at least three subject keywords, and it must conform to community guidelines. Once you have those things, you can publish your resource. You can submit your resource for publication, and it will be reviewed by a member of Quasi staff to make sure it is appropriate and it meets minimum metadata standards. So this is the button to publish a resource. And once it is published, your citation will update. So you can see I pointed this out earlier. It's letting me know this is what your DOI is going to be afterward. Here is an example of a published resource that has the DOI in the citation. 10.4211 backslash HS, and then the alphanumeric code at the end of the resource URL. So in HydroShare, this is what that looks like. I would click publish this resource, and it's letting me know like you don't really have sufficient metadata. You cannot publish this resource. But once you do have sufficient metadata and it's not a test resource, I'm not going to submit my test resource for publication. But once you do have sufficient metadata, you'll be able to submit it for publication. So often I get this question. I published my resource, but there's a new version of the data. Can I make changes to my resource? The answer is no. You cannot make changes to a published resource, even if there's a new version. What you have to do is click create a new version of this resource. And after you've created a new version, the old published version will have a note at the top that says there's a newer version of this resource. And the new version will have a little link at the top that says there's an older version of this resource. So you cannot change a published resource, but you can create a new version and it will be linked to the old version. So there's no disconnect between the old and the new version. And anyone who visits either can see what happened with the changes in the resource. All right. Oh, and the rest of these. So this is obviously edit. This is publish. This is version. This is create a new copy. This is download the entire content of the resource as a zipped Baget archive. And this is, of course, manage who has access. But that is the control bar. And this is delete your whole resource. So next, we're going to go into kind of what this button does. And we're going to go into compute services, which I know is a hot topic. So we have two user-friendly pre-configured compute environments that are adjoined to HydroShare or are configured to work with HydroShare. Quasi Jupyter Hub allows you to choose between stable pre-configured environments in Python and R. And MATLAB Online is the result of our partnership with MathWorks and allows you to take advantage of Quasi's MathWorks partnership to execute MATLAB code in an online environment. Quasi Jupyter Hub, as you can see over here, this is actually out of date because we've recently updated to 3.11, but you can choose between Python, R, and RStudio. And it enables you to launch code that is stored in HydroShare into the adjoining compute environment and execute that code. So if I wanted to launch code into Quasi Jupyter Hub, and this resource contains data and two Jupyter notebooks, I would click open with Quasi Jupyter Hub. And then I would select my environment. This is a Python notebook. And then I would hit start. I'm not going to hit start right now because then you'd have to watch my instance spin up. And we have an entire webinar dedicated to our compute services, so you don't need to watch that happen here. But I would then get a copy of this code in my own compute environment with persistent storage, about 16 gigabytes of persistent storage. And I would be able to execute that code and reproduce the results of the data that was represented in the HydroShare resource. Similarly, with MATLAB code, I can launch MATLAB, any .m files in resources into MATLAB Online using the same open with button. You can also go directly to either environment by going to our apps page and selecting MATLAB Online or Quasi Jupyter Hub. And you can do work directly there. You can create new notebooks, execute code. It is not super computing by any means. It's pretty lightweight, but it's enough to reproduce results, run workshops if you need to. So you can contact us to run a workshop, for example, using our compute services, and just share code with collaborators. We also have RESTful Web Service Application Programming Interface, or API, that has been developed with the intent of enabling many of the functions that are accessible through the web user interface to be done programmatically. It follows open API standards, and you can find the documentation at hydroshare.org/HSAPI. And this is what that documentation I was on the wrong. This is what that documentation looks like. Pretty standard, but you can use the API to create resources, download entire resources, make changes to resources, integrate your app with HydroShare, and a lot more. Similarly, HS client is a Python client for interacting with HydroShare in an object-oriented way. You can do basic operations on resources. You can do file operations, download files from a resource, add files to a resource. And you can do metadata operations like editing titles, abstracts, geographic coverage, and adding funding agencies. We're getting to the end of our time now. There are many resources to help users navigate HydroShare. There's written documentation available at help.hydroshare.org, and that's also available if you just go to this help tab, and it's all available here. You can also go on YouTube and watch the YouTube videos I mentioned in the HydroShare how-to playlist. And if you would like an introduction to HydroShare webinar or hands-on workshop for your organization or lab, for example, you want us to come teach your students, we can do that as well. More information on grants and fellowships at quasi.org/grant opportunities. And to convene a cyber seminar series, you can reach out to Julia Masterman at jmasterman@quasi.org. To inquire about becoming a member university, contact help@quasi.org. And now we have time for questions. I will be here till the end of the hour in case anyone has questions or is currently trying to type a question. But if you don't have any questions, this will also be on YouTube later, so you can feel free to hop off. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.